Here we will indulge in some 1950s science fiction. This one is very archetypical. It turns out that is a word, in many ways. I'm referring to 4D Man, released in 1959. Jack H. Harris, the producer of the 1958 The Blob, utilised the profits from that film to independently fund 4D Man, which he wrote the screenplay to, unlike for The Blob. The two films shared the same director, Irvin S. Yeaworth Jr. Independently produced by Harris, it was then distributed by Universal Pictures. In 4D Man 1, Dr. Tony Nelson seeks to develop an electronic device which would render a solid object transparent, which is to say, achieve a fourth-dimensional state. After an accident during an attempted experiment, Tony's university contract is terminated. Tony enlists the aid of his brother Scott, who is developing an impenetrable substance known as carbonite. Now, very unfortunately, Scott's fiancée Linda falls in love with Tony, begrudgingly, but it happens. Scott is furious. He steals Tony's experiment and manages to transform himself into a 4D state. Initially, Scott manages to communicate this news to Tony, and they both agree to keep silent about it, rather amicably all in all. But Scott soon discovers an unprecedented side effect. The 4D state causes a rapid aging process which can only be reversed through absorbing the life force, if you will, of others. It becomes a sci-fi horror film, one of those films wherein a human being is transformed in some manner, and then just kind of goes around killing a bunch of people. Somewhat typical of the 1950s sci-fi B-picture. But yes, love triangles, boring career people, sci-fi experiment film which becomes a monster on the loose film. This is very archetypical. But what I loved about this picture was its intense colour photography, supplied by D. Lux, and photographed by one Fyodor J. Pal, a cinematographer who had worked since 1927. Everything is so clean-cut, picturesque, and saturated, like it takes place in an idealized 1950s commercial or public service announcement. The musical score, supplied by Ralph Carmichael, is a delightful series of jazz numbers. I'm having a difficult time trying to pinpoint how this affects the film specifically, aside from being sonically pleasant. An orchestral score would have needlessly amplified any melodrama. A series of theremin wails might have placed this film atop a bandwagon, but the jazz? Jazz being ubiquitous of modernity at one time in the 20th century seems to provoke, in myself, further the angle that this film resembles an idealized piece of pro-modern American post-war propaganda, an idealized depiction of American life punctuated by a warning of the dangers of experimentation. I mean, there you go, right? I also really like the VFX. They are very fun to observe. But yes, I don't have a substantial amount to say about this film. I could not observe any Hegelian subtext, or consider any psychosexual theories or modes of analysis to interpret the character's actions. But maybe I should have. I wouldn't consider this top-shelf American 1950s science fiction, although I do quite enjoy this one, and there are elements of it, as I have said, which I wholly admire. Hey, take it or leave it. I'm something of a fan, if not a fan.